Welcome to TSAT. Today I am going to discuss about a topic in geography known as landforms. So here in the case of landforms there are three different variant types of landforms. So the three different variant types of landforms are the mountains, plateaus and plains. So based upon the shape and their features they have been classified into these three different variants. The three different variants of mountains are being classified into folded mountains, block mountains and volcanic mountains and the residual mountains. The residual mountains are also being classified as relict mountains or sometimes also being described as the dissected mountains. So here in this case the mountains are being classified. The first variant type is known as the folded mountains. So these folded mountains are being distributed at different parts of the world, mainly at the plate boundary regions. So here these folded mountains are being formed because of the folding of the crust. So as in the case of the last episode which I have discussed in terms of the movement of the lithospheric plates. So when the lithospheric plates are pushing against one another, what happens is the lithosphere folds to form the mountains lifting upwards. So across the world at different lithospheric plate boundaries we have come across different variant types of mountain ranges in the world. So here in this case we have got in the case of India and China boundary we have got the Himalayan mountain range is a classic example of a mountain folded mountain ranges, the Rockies in the North America, the Andes in the South America, the Alps in the Europe and the Urals in the Russia can be given as some of the examples of folded mountain chains. So the next variant types of mountains is the block mountains. So here in the case of these block mountains, the block mountains are being formed because of the fracture and faulting. So here in this case the difference between a fracture and a fault is just when there is a crack in the crust is known as a fracture. So because of a parallel fractures what happens is the crust dislocates. In this process of dislocation the possibility can be the upliftment of the crust or subduction of the crust. So in this case in the case of the upliftment of the crust it leads to the formation of block mountains, but when the crust is being subducted it leads to the formation of a rift valley. So here there is a difference between a folded mountain and a block mountain. In the case of a folded mountain the crust at the boundaries of the plates is being folded, but in the case of a block mountain what happens is the crust is being uplifted existing between the parallel faults is known as a block mountain. So here the different examples of the block mountains of the world. So here the Black Forest mountains and 𝗧𝗧. The 𝗧𝗧 in France and in West Germany you have got these block forest mountains. These couple of examples can be given as a classic examples of block mountains of the world. The third variant is the third different variant type of mountains is volcanic mountains. So in the case of these volcanic mountains, the volcanic mountains are formed because of the solidification of lava. So here there is a difference between lava and magma. Here in this case of lava and magma, when we are trying to differentiate, magma and lava is one and the same. The difference here is when the molten rock material is within the earth's interior we call it as magma. This magma when it is expelling out of the crust and it is being exposing out we call it as lava. So this lava which expels from the crust and solidifies results in the formation of mountains known as volcanic mountains. So these volcanic mountains, for example you have got these different variant types of volcanic mountains here existing here. we have got Mount Fuji in Japan, or Mount this Krakatau mountain between Java and Sumatra islands is one of the classic examples of volcanic mountains. For example, in the Hawaiian mountains can be given as an example of volcanic mountains present at different parts of the world. So here these volcanic mountains are formed because of the solidification of lava. So here these, depending upon the way they have been formed, depending upon the viscosity of the lava, the volcanic mountains being formed varies in terms of the shape. For example, here when the lava viscosity is high, it leads to the formation of a cone-shaped volcanoes, because of high viscosity the lava will not flow over long distances. But when the viscosity of the lava is less, which is fluidic, which flows more rapidly, which leads to the formation of dome-shaped volcanoes. So based upon the shape of the volcanoes are being classified into these different volcanic mountains are being classified into these different types of volcanoes. So for example, here we have got these different types of volcanoes. For example, you have got Icelandic variant type of volcano, where the flow of lava is so smooth that it doesn't have any kind of explosion. The second variant is the Hawaiian type of volcano, which is present in the Hawaiian Islands, which is a state of United States. Next is the Strombolian variant of volcanoes. The next is Vesuvian type of volcanic activity. Next is Pelian type of volcanic activity. So depending upon the intensity of explosion from these different variants, from the Icelandic variant to the Pelian type of variant of volcanoes, the intensity of explosion of volcanoes varies from these different variant types of volcanoes which I have specified. The reason behind it is when the magma is viscous, or when a volcano is dormant for a longer duration, what happens is the pressure being built beneath the crust is so huge that when the pipe of the volcano is being solidified, the pressure exerted is so high that the explosion is so intense. The highest intense variant type of explosion is being described as the Pelian type, whereas in the case of Icelandic or the Hawaiian type, the explosion is very minimum and the lava flows so freely because the viscosity is less. So based upon the duration of dormancy, or more or less if it is more, the explosion happens so violently. If it is active continuously, the lava's explosion is not so violent because the lava continuously flows, the explosion doesn't happen. The Hawaiian type and the Icelandic type are the classic variant where the explosion is very minimum. So based upon this, volcano mountains are being classified in these different variant types. So here in this case of types of volcanoes, volcanoes are being classified into complex sometimes when they have got many number of branching vents of lava flowing out, which is known as a complex type of volcano having different layers. And because of the explosion of the volcano, it leads to the formation of a depression known as crater. So we discuss crater in two contexts: a depression which is being formed because of the explosion of the volcano, one way. The second type of crater is a depression formed when the surface of the earth is being struck by a meteorite. In both the cases, this depression is being described as a crater. These are the different variant types of volcanoes. The next type of landforms after mountains is plateaus. So depending upon the way they have been formed, they have been classified into three different types of plateaus. The three different variant types of plateaus are Intermountain Plateau, Piedmont Plateau, Continental Plateaus are the main three different variant types of plateaus. So they are also being classified sometimes as tectonic plateaus also. So the plateaus which are the resultant of tectonic activity which are being uplifted. So in this case, to know the meaning of the word plateau, in the case of this plateau, the secondary name of a plateau is otherwise also known as a tableland. The reason behind it is the surface of the top layer surface of the plateau is like a tableland, it is flat, and there is an abrupt sudden elevation being formed. So such kind of structure is being described as a plateau. So for example, in this case, see the kind of structure being formed here. There is an elevated land and there is a flat structure above, and there is an abrupt sudden rise from the surrounding region. This kind of structure is being described as a plateau. This kind of structure can be formed because of different reasons. It can be because of volcanic activity, it can be because of tectonic activity, it can be because of a weathering and erosional activity. When a mountain, when it is being subjected to weathering and erosion, can be converted into a plateau. So the reason for the formation of this structure varies from plateau to plateau. So here in this context, for example, in the case of a tectonic plateau, what happens is the parallel faults which are distant apart, because of this tectonic activity, because of the building up of pressure of the magmatic activity interior, can lift the crust upwards, leading to the formation of tectonic plateau. So the other variant, different types of plateaus are this is a volcanic flow. So here what happens is, because of the lava flowing out spreads across a larger area. So this lava which is spreading across over larger area solidifies to form a plateau, leading to the formation of a lava plateau. So here in this case, the classic example of lava plateau is, for example, our Telangana is a part of a lava plateau. For example, we know this classic example of Deccan Plateau, which is part of Peninsular Plateau, is a classic example where Telangana Plateau is part of Deccan Plateau. For example, the Deccan Plateau is being divided into the Maharashtra Plateau, the Karnataka Plateau, and the Telangana Plateau is a lava plateau, is a classic example because of the formation of this the lava and solidification of lava. So here in this context, this plateau which is being formed over a larger extent is known as a plateau, but this structure, when it is the area of extent is less, we call it as 𝗧. When it is further less, we call it as a 𝗏. So the flat structure, the largest one is known as the plateau. If it is a little bit small, we call it as 𝗧, and if it is further small, it is known as the 𝗏. So on the basis of the extent of area, we classify these plateaus into these different structures. So these plateaus are being classified into different types. These plateaus are being classified into different types on the basis of their existence. For example, this Tibetan plateau which is being projected to you is being described as an intermountain plateau. So these are known as intermountain plateau because these plateau structure is being surrounded by mountainous regions completely, or at least a couple of sites when they are being surrounded by mountains are known as intermountain plateau. So and the different types of plateau, for example, we have got a plateau known as a Piedmont Plateau. So in the case of this Piedmont Plateau, this is a plateau which is at the foothill region. We call this plateau as an Piedmont Plateau. So here in this case, the plateau of Malva, the plateau of Patagonia in Argentina, and the Appalachian Mountain Plateau region can be given as an example of a plateau, which is being shown here is a classic example of a Piedmont Plateau. Piedmont Plateau means a plateau at the foothill regions is known as a Piedmont Plateau. The one example we have got the Malwa Plateau in the case of India, Patagonia in Argentina, and the 𝗹𝗵𝗁 Plateau near the 𝗹𝗵𝗁 mountain ranges in the United States can be given as a classical example of a Piedmont Plateau. Next is a continental plateau. So, a continental plateau is a plateau when the continent itself is in a higher position, is known as a continental plateau. The classic example of a continental plateau is the Brazilian plateau, the South African, the Western Australian, the 𝗳𝗏𝗏 Plateau. These can be given as different examples of continental plateau. So, for example, here in the case of the 𝗳𝗏𝗏 Plateau is being divided into different small types of plateaus, the 𝗳𝗏𝗺 Plateau, etc. So, here these are the different continental plateaus. In the case of Indian Deccan Plateau region, as in the case of the sloping plateau, what is being projected to you here, at the edge of the Western Ghats in the peninsular India, which is because of the longitudinal fissure which has been formed because of this longitudinal fissure, the lava flowing from the west side of from the Western Ghats towards the east. This Deccan Plateau is a tilted plateau. That is the reason why we have got different rivers like the Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, Penna, Vaigai are flowing from the west to east because of the tilting of this plateau. And we have got here a unique kind of feature known as the Deccan Traps here. Why is it called as Deccan Traps? We will be discussing in Indian geography, in physical geography. So, these can be given as some of the examples of plateaus existing in different parts of the world. So, here these are some very important plateaus: the Deccan Plateaus, the Tibetan Plateau, the Anatolia Plateau in Turkey. So, here the Iberian Plateau, the Mexican Plateau, the Colombian Plateau. These are the Kimberley Plateau. These are the different kinds of plateaus which I have highlighted because they can be asked in objective bits in the case of match the following or map location or in normal objective bits. These are the plateaus which are existing in these different countries or different continents. So, identifying these plateaus is very much important as being projected to you. So, after the plateaus, we have got different kinds of plains. So, based upon the way the plains have been formed, plains are being classified into structural plains, erosional plains and depositional plains. So, these structural plain, basically the meaning of the word plain is it is a graded structure, means there are no much differences or there is no slope gradient. The higher and elevated regions doesn't exist in the case of plain. Even though they exist, there is a minimum difference. So, more or less a little bit undulating or a flat surface which is having a less difference in elevation when relatively compared with the rest of the regions is being described as a plain. So, these plains are being formed because of different reasons as I have been projected to you. They are being on the basis of the reason they have been formed. They are being classified into the structural plains, erosional plains and depositional plains. So, they are known as structural plains because the low-lying regions are little bit uplifted because of the endogenetic forces, or a plateau when it is been subducted, when the elevation decreases, a plateau may convert into a plain because of tectonic forces, or a ocean bottom can be uplifted to form a plain. So, the tectonic activity is responsible the formation of the structure of the plain, whether it can be a plateau can be converted into plain or a ocean bottom can be converted in uplifted to above the sea, forming a plain. So, because of the structural factors, it is known as a structural plane. So, the next is erosional plane. So, when a plateau is been eroded or a mountain is been eroded to a low level, a plateau can be converted into an erosional plane. So, because of the reason for the formation, this is how the plains are being described into. Next is the depositional plane. So, because of the weathering and erosion, because of the process of weathering and erosion, when the weathered particle or the sand particles in the higher elevated mountain regions, when the rock fragments carried by the river or the blowing wind or the moving ice deposits the fragments of rock from higher elevated regions to the lower regions, resulting in the formation of a plane, which are known as a depositional plane. The classic example of these depositional planes, for example, in the case of India, we can give a classic example of a depositional plane. So, this can be given as a classic example of a depositional plane in India, which is being described as an Endogenetic plane. See this, the extension. This is a projection which is being described as a Ganga plane, extending from the UP plains, Bihar plains and Bengal plains. See this, there is extension of the plane from the Aravalli boundaries to the Bengal. So, here in this case, these are known as the Great Plain regions, extending from the Indus plains to the west of Aravallis to the Brahmaputra plains in the Assam, together from the Brahmaputra in the east and to the Indus plains in the west, and the Gangetic plain being projected together, known as the Great Plain regions. So, here in this case, these plains are considered to be fertile because many different variant kinds of minerals from the higher elevated regions of the mountains, because of weathering and erosion from different regions, are being deposited, leading to the formation of the alluvium, which is a fertile soil. So, this is being described as a depositional plane because this is formed by the activity of deposition by the river systems. This can be given as another example of a depositional plane by wind. So, the western Rajasthan and the lowest plain in the China can be given as an example of depositional plains. In the case of these erosional plains, we have got different variant types of erosion. The northern Canada, the northern Europe and the western Siberian plains can be given as an example of erosional plains. So, for example, you have got this northern European wheat plain. So, wheat belt, this can be given as an example of a plain region, which is been an example of a plain where wheat is being cultivated. This is another plain, an example, the Great Plain regions of America, which is being divided into corn belt and wheat belt region, is a classic example of a plain which is useful in the cultivation of wheat and corn region. Is one of the region here which is been used for the cultivation of these different regions. These are the different kinds of landforms, broadly being classified into mountains, plateaus and plains because of the formation of different because they have been formed because of different reasons. They have been classified into these different ways. So, finally, we have come to know that these different kinds of landforms are being formed because of different endogenetic and exogenetic forces. So, the endogenetic forces, for example, the magmatic activity can be given as an example of an endogenetic force. So, here because of this magmatic activity, it may lead to the fracture of the crust, or it may lead to the expulsion of lava, and it may lead to the solidification and formation of different plateaus and plains, is an example of an endogenetic force. For example, in the case of exogenetic force, for example, weathering and erosion can be given as an example of an exogenetic force which is responsible for the formation of landforms. For example, in the case of weathering and erosion, for example, in the case of weathering, if you have, as in the case of different kinds of examples which I have shown to you, because of the phenomena of weathering and erosion, what happens is a mountain can be converted into a plateau can be converted into a plain. In the same way, the weathered and eroded material on the mountain is deposited elsewhere, and it may lead to the formation of a depositional plane. So, in this case of different types of physical forms which have been formed in the case of folded mountains, plateaus or plains, because of these different kinds of exogenetic and endogenetic forces. For example, the folded mountains are being formed because of endogenetic force. For example, the plains are being formed. Depositional plane is being formed because of because of the exogenetic force. So, this is how because of endogenetic and exogenetic forces different kinds of landforms are being formed. Thank you friends. We shall meet in the next session to discuss about another topic in geography.